I knew there was trouble with Jeff the moment he called our biggest client an easy mark. Before he appeared, my work was completely different. Spreadsheets, contracts, piles of paperwork, and no scandals. Not flashy, not loud, but reliable. I was a protective wall in heels. For 8 years, I kept everything under control, translating complex legal texts into simple language, and keeping an eye on our main client, a huge Fortune 100 company. Their lawyers probably counted their time in 15-second increments, but they were happy and had no complaints. I've never been a bright star. I didn't need it. While the salespeople were chasing plans and the directors were playing boss at meetings, I was the reason our lawyers slept soundly. Every important contract or change went through me first, and I immediately connected her department automatically like breathing. Our client contact, Marissa, even joked that I was her spirit animal for contracts. We worked precisely, carefully, maybe boringly, but it worked perfectly. Maybe that's the problem. My job seems boring. So far, everything is calm. It's like a seatbelt. Everybody hates it until an accident happens. So I sat quietly in my chair, sipping my cold coffee and watching other people's problems rage around me, knowing that mine were under control. So what happened next hit like a train loaded with unpaid bills and someone else's ego. Everything was simple in the company. If sales came up with a new strategic turn, I would quietly ask, do the lawyers know? If a new product entered a gray area, I would remind them see point 14. I didn't interfere. I saved the ship from being damaged. And it worked. No lawsuits, no fines. The client even wrote me letters of gratitude, almost like love letters, only corporate ones. Within the company, I was a quiet savior. People only noticed me when something impossible urgently needed to be solved. I didn't gossip, didn't go out for lunch with the bigwigs, didn't build career connections. But if a deal was hanging by a thread because of some trivial matter, I'd already highlighted it in advance, wrote letters, and filed them in a folder. Potential disasters averted. I didn't have an office with windows. I didn't have good parking. But when it came time to review the largest contract, who did the client ask for on all the calls? Me. Not the vice president. Not the director with fancy words. For a second, I even believed that it means something. And then Jeff showed up, straight out of some consulting clown school where they teach you to seriously pronounce the word synergy. He wore moccasins without socks and spoke as if LinkedIn had come to life, taken cocaine, and was poring over presentations. From the first day, I felt like he was looking at me like furniture. Or worse, like old furniture. But back then, in the last calm weeks before his reign of mistakes, people still trusted me. I still included lawyers in all the emails. It was a matter of my career. Everything was going smoothly. The ship was holding up. The storm hadn't hit yet, although I could already see the clouds. Jeff entered the company like a drunken magician at a funeral. Too loud, too confident, throwing around buzzwords like confetti. He didn't shake hands. He was building synergies. He didn't introduce himself. He was creating speed. On the very first day, he gathered the team and gave a speech about the new operational agility. Essentially, this meant throwing everything on the table and hoping we wouldn't get sued. With his $300 haircut and IT tan, I immediately realized this guy had never lost a client, and that was all in a quarter. But he would soon. He quickly took note of me. I was the only one who didn't nod like a toy dog during his speeches. I just sat there, arms crossed, drinking from a mug with the inscription, "Documentation saves lives." I bought it as a joke, but it turned out to be prophetic. In the second week, he was on a call with a team of strategic clients. Big news, contract changes, things that used to go straight to my inbox. But now everything was going without lawyers. I raised my hand virtually. We've already shown this to Sarah's legal team. He rolled his eyes, as if I'd asked if he could fax it. Stop copying lawyers into everything. It's too much. It scares the client. It looks paranoid. We're not in court. We're building relationships. And he said this in front of the entire team. 3 junior managers froze. With 4 smiles. One quietly deleted the legal from the email. The other pretended to drink water for half a minute. I turned off the sound and stared out the window. The gray sky looked like wet cement to a gay. Then I turned on the microphone, smiled, and said, "Understood. No arguments." I knew this slide wasn't worth dying for, especially with a person for whom unnecessary formality rules. But inside I felt this slight tension, like a warning from the bones. I stopped copying lawyers and removed them from my email autocomplete. No more "Fui Jeff" wanted optimization. Let there be silence. And I watched. I watched how quickly everything falls apart when no one checks the fine print. Jeff began to accelerate contract changes, convincing the team that we were too valuable to waste time on bureaucracy. One day, he called me and asked if it was possible to remove these unnecessary liability clauses from the client's contract renewal. I politely replied that it was precisely these points that saved us from bankruptcy. He laughed. "You're sweet, but we're playing a different game now." I said, "Great, just tell me when the fines start piling up like pancakes at a gas station." From that moment on, it was as if I disappeared for him. Not in a mystical sense, I just wasn't in his world anymore. They stopped inviting me to strategic calls. My advice, which was once valued as gold, has become background noise. He once told the team, "We're all adults. Use your experience. We don't need to run to mommy lawyer every time." I looked at the monitor and wrote down the date. Just the date. I thought this might come in handy someday. I didn't mean to start a scene or shout about rules. I'm not like that. I am like granite, quiet, motionless, but slowly erasing everything around me. So I did as he told me. I stopped involving lawyers and watched as things with the client became increasingly complicated. And every time something looked strange, I made a note. Quietly, without noise. A small, neat magazine. Moves one after another. It all started with a message in the SLC at 6:04 a.m. Big news. Be prepared to move quickly. No greeting, no dots. Just an order, like we're a pack of wolves on caffeine. At 9:15, Jeff was already showing a presentation called Accelerated Expansion and Return Strategy. There were animated bulletins, confetti gifts, and even a fist-to-fist slide money. The idea was this: dramatically expand cooperation with the main client, double the number of users, launch new features, forget about deadlines, and sign everything by Friday. The problem was that the contract required any expansion to undergo security checks and strict rules for storing data in the EU. Jeff called these outdated barriers. I call them time mines. The sales team was as happy as if they had been served cheap tequila. Jeff promised bonuses, quick promotions, and even hinted at a corporate event in Cancun. By lunchtime, the team was already up to speed and didn't even mention the word check. At 2:37, the client sent a draft of changes. At 2:47, Jeff replied, "Looks great. Moving on. Let's not quibble. We're on the same page." The lawyers didn't see it. He didn't send it to me either. I only found out about it by chance, when I overheard one of the junior managers whisper in the kitchen, "Do you think we'll get punished if we skip the privacy addendum?" Jeff said, "The client is calm," and then my stomach went cold. I went back to my desk, opened a private folder I hadn't used in years, and created a new document. Client expansion risks. Confidential internal memos. I wrote it without emotion, without pathos. Just a precise list of what Jeff had broken and when. Section 5.2 requires 60 days written notice for data storage expansion. There was no notice. Section 7.1 says, if the number of users exceeds the limit, pricing must be changed and board approval must be obtained. No price changes were proposed. Section 9.4. Any change to data processing requires a new DPA. There's no new DPA. No one noticed. No one raised the alarm. Just me with a keyboard and quiet persistence. By the end of the week, I had 12 items, all with dates, attached messages, and drafts. I didn't tell anyone anything. I was assembling a time bomb disguised as a folder of receipts. Meanwhile, Jeff paced the office like he'd invented contracts. His mantra was sign and close. Sign and close. Like a student at a beer ping-pong final. He disabled 2 internal controls that were supposed to catch violations. I knew because I'd set them up myself. A notification came in, a deviation was detected. No legal review. And 10 minutes later, the signal was gone. Jeff simply turned off the system. I wrote that down too. It looked like someone running a red light in a school zone and shouting about innovation. The worst part was, people believed him, even those who should have understood. They were tired of long deals, of rules, of constant defense. And Jeff offered shortcut, and everyone grabbed it like kids with candy. I didn't argue, didn't write to lawyers, didn't forward emails. I wanted clear lines of communication. Great. I made them surgically precise. My notes grew, and with them my silence. I started typing logs at home, putting them in a folder marked vacation reading. Each new document that Jeff approved without review got its place. Every time he skipped a point, ignored a signal, or said, "Let's just sign," I clicked save and moved on. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew it was near. You can't keep taping the valve shut forever. Eventually it will explode. And when that happens, I'll have all the evidence, quietly whispering, "You said not to involve lawyers." And I didn't. I first noticed it by accident. Correspondence about the client's launch, which it should have reached me, but it didn't. I found it later in a forwarded email from a junior analyst. It really should have slipped past your control. The second time, it was even clearer. Jeff responded to the email with "everyone" and deliberately removed my name from the recipient list. He didn't even hide it. He just didn't want me to participate. At the last meeting, he said, pacing back and forth with a toy in his hands, as if he wanted to be Steve Jobs, "Too many voices are interfering. We don't need rule keepers. We need accelerators." I smiled, nodded, even clapped a little. Then I opened my file and wrote a new entry. April 21st, excluded from data compliance discussion during client expansion. I forwarded that email and named the file evidence of intentional rule bypassing. Calmly, step by step, I continued to sharpen my blade. By May, I was no longer allowed into a single important discussion. My position is the same, but my email has changed. Where before there were dozens of emails with contracts and amendments, now only meeting invitations with no need for your participation. I turned into a ghost with a pass. And then it happened. The first violation surfaced in the middle of the month. It turned out that the client had migrated data to a cloud server in Frankfurt, and this was not included in our DPA. According to Clause 6.3, such changes required an official addendum and notification to the client. This was not done. The second violation came 6 days later. The internal presentation happily announced user growth plus 112% since March. For Link, this would look like Jeff's feat, but I knew. Clause 7.1 says that growth over 50% requires a price review and board approval. No new agreement, no board. Silence. Only my anxiety. I sat at my desk, flipping through the folder, tapping my pen on notes, and looking at this slide as if it were a written confession, and did something I hadn't done since Jeff's speech about overdoing it. I sent an official warning. In short, dry to the point. Jeff has a copy of the Strategic Accounts VP. Ties operations. Subject: verifying compliance with terms and conditions during expansion. I like to point out two things. Migrating data to a new zone requires amendments to DPA Clause 6.3. User growth of over 50% requires a price review and board approval. Clause 7.1. I propose suspending implementation until the lawyers provide an opinion. I could prepare a review package. It wasn't a grenade. It was a whisper in a safe, but it existed. One permanent mark in history. Jeff didn't respond. Tanya wrote a cold thank you. Noted. I saved the correspondence, made a PDF, and added the final season to the folder. Jeff's best. Then it got even worse. Jeff praised those who don't wait for a legal nanny. I turned into an office press sitter. Smiles, perfunctory thanks, but fewer meetings and invitations. My role wasn't just being reduced. It was carefully cut out with a scalpel, and I continued writing. Every message in SLC about speed instead of rules. Every contract without verification, every time I was passed over. Everything went into the file. They could remove me from the calendar, erase me from email copies, rewrite my job title to a blank slate. But they couldn't erase the trail I'd built with monastic precision. No scandals, no hysteriques. Just the quiet ritual of someone who'd been through this before. When you have proof, there's no need to shout. Just wait for the echo to reach the board of directors. A calendar invite arrived in 87. Meeting in 50 minutes. Topic: restructuring, alignement, talent optimisation. A typical phrase, coined in a glass conference room over cold coffee and fear. I clicked accept. I already knew. I'd seen this slow gelatin before. Only now I wasn't standing under it, but next to it, measuring its trajectory. 10 minutes later, through the thin glass of the HR room, I heard Jeff laugh, loud as a drunk. Success karaoke. He was on a call with the client's VP himself, my contact, the person who used to write to me directly about every change in the complex. This is what it means to be agile, Jeff shouted. Clear communication, fast implementation, no red tape. I looked at my inbox. There was already an email from HR. As discussed, your role will be closed as part of a strategic update. Last day in 2 weeks. Closed, as if I were a screensaver or a side effect of a drug. No offer to stay, no transfer of duties, just a polite disappearance. 5 minutes later, Jeff himself called, without a hello. Sweet victory in his voice. He wanted to discuss it in person. Look, this isn't about your work. You were great, but we're moving to fast mode. We need those who can move. The word move hung in the air like cheap perfume. I was silent for 3 seconds. I took a breath and calmly said, I'll begin the closing process. A professional, he replied. I knew you'd understand everything. Thanks for keeping it clean. Clean. The word stuck in my throat like a hook. I spent the rest of the day going through files, keeping only what was mine and backing up the logs I'd been collecting for months. Everything was strictly internal. No leaks, no drama. But my last entry was special. I opened a blank email. Only one internal recipient. Compellerbakacampany.com. That same shadow box for serious violations. It didn't raise alarms, but it got archived. It was read sooner or later. Subject, contract risks. Strategic accounts. Attachment. I attached the summary. Dates, contract clauses, links. No emotion, no predictions. Just the facts. 12 pages, written with the tone of a person folding a flag. And then I waited. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even say anything to my partner. That evening, I came home, opened a beer, and watched the rain pound the edge of the veranda. Anger swirled somewhere inside, but I kept it out. Not yet, because something colder had settled inside. It wasn't anger, not grief, but readiness. Jeff thought he'd won. He paced the office like a caffeinated nut, receiving praise for numbers that hadn't even been achieved yet. The client vice president was temporarily on his hook. No one asked where the supporting documents were. No one looked at Clause 7.1 or the Frankfurt violation, but I knew it would come to this. It always does. Compliance doesn't shout. It whispers and then strikes. And when the blow comes, my name will be on the case. Not as a mistake, not as a forgotten voice, but as the one who warned. On Thursday, Tanya wrote to me, not from my work email, but from my personal Gmail. Topik, Oli. No greeting, no text, just a screenshot. At the top is the client's legal department logo. Below are 4 bold words. A formal breach of contract. I reread it 3 times. Each time the air grew heavier. The list of violations included failure to submit an updated DPA after the infrastructure transfer, illegal expansion of the number of over-limit users, major changes without amendments, and without the legal department's approval. A possible fine of up to $2.6 million plus the right to terminate the contract entirely. That very crown, Jeff's initiative, the $15 million partnership with which he covered up the reduction of my role, was now lying on the legal guillotine. I didn't answer Tanya what to write. I told you, you expel me yourself. I just sat, my breath shaking, the beer cooling on the table, and looked at that screenshot as if it were a ghost that had finally decided to knock. At noon, the phone vibrated again. A message to Ling Treiyin, the junior salesperson, because I was no longer inside the company. Did you see? The lawyer's in rage. Jeff is panicking. Someone alerted the board. I closed the app. Let the panic fly. That day, I imagined the office like a submarine with a crack in the hull. Emails bounced off like sonar. Executives rushed around, throwing around phrases like intangible breach and good faith rectification deadlines, while their logo t-shirts were dark with sweat. And finally, after months of being Cassandra in comfortable shoes, I found myself outside the explosion. I wasn't sitting in urgent meetings, making excuses between legal and sales with a forced smile. I was out of the game, and they needed me more than ever. Sarah, the senior associate I always CC'd, finally chimed in. I knew instantly. Tanya had sent a reply. Subject, urgent client expansion activity chronology. Sarah's reply. Why weren't we notified? Were the complos flags? Was there even a legal department involved? These weren't rhetorical questions. She knew the answer. Everyone knew it, but now there was a price to pay for the answers. I pictured Jeff at that meeting. His face tense, his collar wet. He was trying to turn the words agile innovation into legal defense. I pictured the ops team, frantically searching for emails they hadn't even copied, trying to piece together the chain of command I'd long ago prepared and sent like a silent curse. And most of all, I imagined the moment when someone, most likely a tired legal assistant or risk analyst, would finally stumble upon my last email. The very one I sent the day before I was fired. It contained contract clauses, articles, dates. No copies to the legal department, only the address of the compensation board, as required. I didn't write to anyone that day, didn't post hints on LinkedIn, didn't send to Jeff, I'm thinking about you. I just opened a new beer and listened to the violation notification. It sounds like a lullaby to me. There's a special silence after a fire. When the sirens have died down, the smoke is still billowing, and no one understands who's in charge now. They found themselves in that silence. And I watched from the sidelines, calm, already out of the picture, not out of anger, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The investigation didn't start with a bang, with a checklist. The lawyers, like forensic experts, took the case step by step. They didn't shout, but rather unraveled Jeff's masterpiece, thread by thread, and saw that it was held together by tape, not design. Tanya, who now sent me evening updates like a war correspondent, said the lawyers dug up the history of the deal, changes to contracts, letters, correspondence in the SLC. They were looking for that word everyone fears, responsibility, but found nothing. No legal audits, no official warnings, no violation notices. Just pretty slides, automatic approvals. And Jeff's voicemails. Don't bother the lawyers, they're slowing us down. But the silence didn't last long. One young lawyer, Alina, I think, was rummaging through the archive and noticed something odd. One email, sent directly to the compliance board address. Subject, contract risk. Strategic client expansion. Time, 10:24 a.m., exactly the day before my last outing. No copies, no fuss. Just a pinpoint shot that had been sitting there all this time, waiting. She opened it. Inside were 12 pages. Lists, articles, dates, evidence of violations, risk forecasts. And my signature at the bottom, dry, calm. No drama, no accusations, just facts that make lawyers sit up straighter and vice presidents start sweating in their shirts. Tanya said the room went silent. The lawyers kept asking, who knew? Now the answer was right in front of them. I knew, and I warned before it all happened, before they crossed me off. But they notice because I did exactly what they told me to. Jeff said, don't involve the legal department. I didn't. I followed protocol. I sent the letter to the board's address, as specified in the escalation rules. Now it couldn't be ignored. Alina showed it to Sarah, the senior lawyer. Sarah read it twice, said nothing, just highlighted 3 places and forwarded the letter to the chief lawyer with a note. This changes the deadlines. And indeed it did. My letter proved that this wasn't an accident, but a predictable violation that had been warned about but ignored. Jeff kept trying to pass it off as a common team error, but when the board saw my report, the story fell apart. He himself told the only person with the brake pedal to stop pressing it. According to Tanya, the correspondence between the managers flared up. They involved risk management, finance, pulled up the logs. My letter was opened, downloaded, added to the case. And the best thing is, it sounded like revenge. It was a clean, professional strike, like a scalpel. There's a special power in shooting an arrow quietly and then just waiting for it to reach its target. The board of directors convened even on a Sunday. No food, no chatter, just suits, silence, and fear. Jeff arrived before everyone else, pacing back and forth with his phone, tugging at his shirt collar as if it were choking him. The chief legal officer began the meeting with a phrase, We have clarity. Then came the slides. Every decision Jeff made, every violation, every moment where it could have been stopped, but he chose speed. Sarah from legal department spoke calmly, almost like at a funeral, and at the end showed a printout of my letter. Those same 12 pages. This is the earliest official escalation, she said, turning the sheet so everyone could see my name. All the risks, contract clauses, dates are here. She did everything by the book. Legal department was excluded from the correspondence, and she correctly forwarded the letter to the board's address. The chief legal officer said slowly, firmly, "The violation is confirmed. We have no defense, no evidence of consultation, no mitigation measures. The client had every right to terminate the contract and impose penalties. Losses of at least $50 million. The room was silent. Jeff fidgeted in his chair like a child in a cramped space and finally spoke. "Wait, this isn't sabotage. It's a process glitch. We worked on light rails. That was the order. I inherited old problems, and she's part of them, too. Well, she didn't involve lawyers either." He pointed to my name on the printout, like it was a weapon against him. The chief legal officer didn't even blink. She was told not to involve lawyers. The whole team heard it. There are witnesses. She followed the instructions, but still recorded the risks through the internal channel. "By the way, were you the one who insisted on removing the legal advisor from the correspondence?" Sarah added, her voice hard as steel under silk. "You can't cut the brakes and then blame the driver for the car crash." Silence fell again, even heavier than before. Tanya later told me that Jeff's face turned gray, like murky water. He blinked as if something had gotten in his eye, but everyone saw panic. The chairman of the board leaned forward. "Did you know that her role requires the involvement of lawyers when expanding client work?" Jeff nodded. "Yes, but you removed that function." A pause. A weak nod. "Yes, then the responsibility lies with you." There was no argument after that. Just the rustling of papers, coughing, the creaking of chairs. The arrow had hit its target, but the blow still rippled. The atmosphere in the room was thick, as if the air had turned to molasses, smelling of Jeff's fear and despair. Tanya said you could even hear the hum of the projector. On the screen was a letter from me addressed to the board. Subject: contract risks. Date: the day before my dismissal. The CC line was blank. The void looked like a tombstone. The chairman leaned forward again. His voice was low, but sharp as a knife. "You told her not to involve lawyers." Jeff tried to smile. It came out jerky, like a spasm. "Well, yes, but the point was to simplify." I didn't think the lawyer interrupted calmly, precisely, and fatally. "So, you took full legal responsibility. And now we've lost $15 million. Jeff blinked twice. No answer. It was. Only the mouth was slightly open, like a siren that has broken down and doesn't know it's fallen silent. Sarah turned to the board. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate exclusion of the legal process. And the one who was removed from this process, she pointed to my name, acted according to protocol. She warned. She documented the risks. She did everything except set off the fire alarm in the yard. Tanya said, "No one moved, no one interrupted. When it falls, Gelatina are silent." Jeff grabbed a glass of water as if it could save him. His hands were shaking. The glass hit the table louder than his last excuse. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. The chief lawyer didn't even turn to him, but turned straight to the counsel. "Everything is clear here. This is not a system error. This one person removed the protection because he considered the process unnecessary. The violation and its consequences can be traced. The documents confirm this." And then, as if according to a script, the projector itself updated itself. My letter appeared on the screen again, my name, the time it was sent, all the points, and links to the articles of the contract. Everything hung over Jeff like a sign from above. He leaned back in his chair, pale as a wall. His forehead glistened with sweat. His fingers tapped nervously against his pants. The back of the head was covered with red spots. Tanya later said that he looked like he wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to run. The silence lasted for almost a minute. Then the chairman of the council closed the folder, stood up, and said, "Write it down in the minutes. We were warned. And that's it. No shouting, no punching, no loud statements. just the soft sound of laptops closing and chairs creaking. When everyone left, Jeff was left alone. He sat and looked at the screen, where my name still glowed like the last match in the darkness. No copies, no lawyers, only consequences. M.